Good evening. So how is everyone? I hope everyone had a good week and found some time to do some writing or perhaps expand on what they started last week. If anyone, did anyone bring anything that they might like to read tonight? It's my first question that they were perhaps working on. Kirsty's hand's gone up.
Yeah.
Any other takers? Paul, a tentative Paul hand. Lovely. Well, does anyone else have anything perhaps that they might like to discuss that they're writing, that they would like perhaps to just sort of put it out there? Or Laura, okay.
Do you remember at the very beginning I said that I'd like to talk about writing other people's stories and the kind of the ethics of that? I'd love to get some input from other people on that if possible.
I was only thinking about that today, Laura, so I'm glad you've reminded us, because we were going to let's talk about that now before we hear, perhaps before, oh no, let's hear the readings first, because otherwise it leaves everyone in a state of anxiety, and then we can have a chat about that, because do you remember, Paul, we were going to talk about using the ethics involved of using real people in our work, and I think there's many different ways to go about it, but we can talk a bit about that after we've heard the readings. That's great, we'll do that. So Kirsty, if you'd like to start reading yours, if you want to introduce it, perhaps say where it came from and whether it was inspired by, what it was inspired by, one of the exercises or something else, then that's great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it was inspired by Of All the Things That Could Have Gone Wrong prompt that we did. And it's about an event that happened in 2001, I think. And I've called it Bungee, Boom Nets and Burns. So, of all the things that could have gone wrong during my daredevil 2 weeks in New Zealand, swimming with dolphins was not the activity where I expected to lose my dignity. Screaming fuck at the top of my lungs as I reverse bungeed in a spinning orb in the middle of Auckland didn't come close. 1, 2, 3, bungee. Was exhilarating despite the pull back and slow climb back up. Instead, it happened on the second most miserable day there, as there was slightly less rain than the day we went luging in a storm and dripped our way into a motel begging for a room with a jacuzzi. Why does a drizzle shiver your timbers more than a tidal wave? Firstly, my specially purchased contact lenses seemed to burn my eyes, so I ended up a water mole, unable to see without my -10 prescription. What could I see of the dolphins as we jumped off the boat into the water below? Not a bloody fin. Then they swam away. The crew hauled us in. Quick, onto the boom net. We were hammocked to the side of the boat, rushing through the water in a game of chase. Wind in our hair, grins on our faces, boobs hanging out of my costume. Shit, my boobs were hanging out of my costume. 2 giant cod flopping around, gasping to go back under cover, wary of being caught. I hoiked my arm over the net and scooped them up in the other, clamming shut the shell of my costume. Please let them have been too interested in the dolphins, eyes to the horizon, not down at my treasure chest. Did I swim with dolphins that day? Who knows? But I did end up with a rope burn on my bingo wings and the worst sunburn of my life, and all on a day that started with drizzle.
I love that.
That was great. It's very funny.
Really funny.
And sadly, that did happen. It's not even an exaggeration.
It was very funny, and the way you told it was very funny. The way that the sound effects of the jumping and the repetition was very, very funny.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. I really liked when you went into describing your body as sort of elements of the sea. I thought that was really, really brilliant. Of the treasure chest and the cod boobs. Was
Cod
it
flopping around?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. And I just thought it just became really something else. And that's what I loved about it, the way that you kind of expanded, and it was all, really humorous, and just this, not seeing anything when you're actually trying to, this is your one moment. So I think it worked really well. And I think you could I liked your humor is really, do you like pun as
I
well?
love a pun. I love a pun. How could you tell?
I just knew it. And I think puns are brilliant in and wordplay, I mean, it's so rich as well, that how you can mix in that sort of playfulness into a piece. I mean, Ali Smith does it the whole time. I don't know if you've read any Ali Smith.
I haven't. Is she the one that does winter, spring?
Yeah, that's her latest.
Okay.
She did a quartet of she wrote it in real time as well. But if you I think you'd really enjoy her work. And if you wanted to start with a standalone novel, because I mean they're all standalone, but I would look at Hotel World, and it starts actually with someone falling and going wee. So I think it's great. I'd love to actually hear more of this kind of writing where one thing becomes another and takes on the kind of surroundings in this humorous way. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Did that have a title, by the way?
Oh, I called it, was it Bungee, Boom Nets and Burns?
Oh, that's it. Yes. I like a bit of alliteration as well. Fantastic.
Can you tell I've done English literature?
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, so this is taking up all the things that you set for the exercise, kind of a postcard thing, pathetic fallacy thing, a journey that went wrong, a bit of everything. But first, I'd just like to say I'm always very skeptical that a kind of random exercise will be any good or be any fun. And I think the fun's all mine because I'm just totally absolved of responsibility for what I write. She told me to write it. So I just write something, and I am really, really enjoying it. It's been a real antidote to the novel that I've been writing, which is a serious novel. So this has been a fab antidote to all of that. And I can't seem to stop writing whimsical stuff. It's kind of, so maybe that's why a reaction to spending so long on a novel and then just being told to write anything and it comes out kind of rubbish, but it's okay. I'm enjoying it. So this is kind of 5 postcards. I didn't send them, but I might have sent them on this journey. And it's called Big Fat Gay Cake. First postcard, September 25th, Chongqing, China. Dear Daniel, just boarded the Century Legend for the river cruise. Trying to get into spirit of it. Expectations fairly low. Passengers half locals, half foreigners. Mark pulled his old upgrade trick. It's our 30th anniversary. Close enough. Chongqing, 16 million people, bright lights, really big city. Love to Matthew, P and M. Second postcard, September the 5th, again, Chongqing. Dear Daniel, had to write again after a gratefully decent buffet. Passport delay earlier should have been a clue. We've been designated as an anniversary couple, but in too deep now. Bride and groom balloons in the room, towels folded into swans in love, bedding in burlesque red. Chinese lucky color, but slightly traumatizing. Love to Matthew, tell him to rest. He's too pale generally, as well as that leg. P and M. Third postcard, September 26th, Fengdu, Ghost City. Dear Daniel, Fengdu is all about the underworld. Bridge of Helplessness, Last Glance to Home Tower, Ghost Torturing Pass. Underworld feels a bit real now after buffet dinner. Big cake brought to tables of newlyweds and anniversaries. Then everyone called up on stage to applause and gifts. Oh shit, gay pride, yay. Ate big gay cake in a room in revenge. More love to Matthew. Remind him he has 2 legs and one is getting better every day. P&M. September 25th, somewhere on Yangtze River. Qtang, Wu, and Jilin Gorges, 3 gorges. Awesome, but Mark had to go down inside with a bout of claustrophobia, walls closing in, etc. Guide says Dam is a testament to unbelievable skills and wisdom of Chinese people. Close brackets. No further repercussions of big gay cake, except Mark is Mrs. Medina on board. You may call him that on our return. More and more love to Matthew. How is he? Apologies about the whole leg thing. Mark and I blame no one. P&M. September 20th, Shanghai. Disembarked at Yichang. Cruise greatly exceeded expectation despite big gay cake moment. Bullet train to greatest city on the planet. Everything is huge, so we are feeling humble. Skyscrapers, evening light shows, hustle and bustle extraordinaire. Human awesome, but Mark says diminished by its dirty secret, coal-bearing barges upriver under cover of darkness. Dumplings to die for. Mark says, apologies for the slight on Matthew in the last card. Some of the blame is on us. We were in such a terrible hurry that day. Hope special shoe fitting comes quickly. P&M. December 15th, London. Dear Daniel, I had this postcard left over on our return. View from top floor of second tallest building in the world, which is in Shanghai, if you remember our once in a lifetime trip recently. I hope we can put Matthew's leg behind us, stand tall again, as it were. Mark says, don't add the ancient Chinese proverb here. So just to say, have yourselves a very Merry Christmas and a peaceful and healthy New Year. Paul and Mrs. Medina. LOL. XOXO. The end.
What a wonderful short story.
That's great.
It works as a form, it works so well because of the one-sidedness, but also the small snippets of this leg story.
Yeah.
I just loved it. I felt quite moved by the end of it because there's no response. So it's yeah.
The cake bit is true. The leg bit's not true.
Well, I wouldn't have known what, to me it was all sounded very, very true. Well, I suppose it's not really about the truth, but I was really enjoying imagining what had happened between you all, and the fact that you've got home now and you still haven't seen them.
What happened to the leg, Laura?
I don't know.
Well,
it wasn't very good.
A friend of mine once ran over another friend's foot when reversing. So I was imagining that it was a sort of accident, but obviously you're responsible for. But I mean, it's so evocative as well. Just the names and this this joke that gets sort of out of hand as well. I just thought it was I really enjoyed the sort of flash nature of it, flash fiction nature of it as well. I think it's a great way of telling a story.
Yeah, me too. I enjoyed it very much writing it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, as Laura says, it was a really natural writing voice, and you've created a whole world in flashes, so that's brilliant.
It's hard to sustain that because when I did my first novel, it was basically, I submitted something quite different, and the publisher that took it on, it was just after Bridget Jones's Diary, and they wanted me to basically write a kind of gay Bridget Jones's Diary in the same kind of format. And I tried writing in that kind of diary entry format, and I ran out of steam so quickly, it's really difficult to sustain it. And this is even more tight because it's a postcard. But I thought you did a brilliant job at actually using the constraints to your advantage. So actually that was part of the humor, wasn't it? Was that it was so the short little pithy lines. Very good.
Yeah, it's the exercise, you said write a postcard. I just followed your instructions, and the format came out of, no, sorry, the story came out of the format rather than the other way around.
Yes, the constraints, I think, can sometimes really work, because you can't, there's not much wriggle room, so you have to get to the point as well, and concoct a kind of, some kind of action within it. So there's a novel that started me writing years ago. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, by Julia Darling, called Crocodile Soup. Are you familiar with it, Paul? Yeah. And she sadly died in her 40s, late 40s, but she was a great poet and very funny writer, but very vivid. But she starts her novel with a letter from a mother to daughter. And I often set this task. I'm not going to do it on this course because it's sort of slightly about shifting point of view through novel writing. But I get people to look at how to start a story through a letter from one character to another, and then the next chapter becomes a full chapter. So there's always room, I think, to move between these short postcards and then to perhaps put it alongside what happens the day the postcard arrives, within a character's world, and a sort of, and move between the two. But I think, I don't know, it's just always an idea, isn't it? I just like the brevity of a postcard. I don't know if any of you follow postcards from the past on Twitter, but it's always very, very funny. It's possibly the thing that can keep me going on Twitter sometimes, or keep me coming back. Right, okay, so that's wonderful. So should we talk now, Paul, about the ethics of using real people within our work? And perhaps you could start it off by talking a little bit about how you've faced it or gone about it within your own writing so far.
I've always drawn on people that I know in my fiction. They're usually composites. So I usually start with somebody, and then they kind of evolve and they become a kind of composite character, so they're not recognizable, identifiable. But there's usually a particular person, a friend or family member. I mean, most of the dynamics that we write about tend to be those that we've grown up with. So the dynamics that you grew up with in your household, I think, tends to come through in your fiction, whether you intend it or not. It's just naturally there, in the same way that we kind of repeat those relationships in our relationship history, But I think when you're writing non-fiction, so writing this memoir that I've written, I think I took a decision very early on in that I would write a draft of it where I didn't think about anyone's feelings at all. And then after that was written, then I would go over it and think about other people's considerations. So there's lots of stuff that I then either edited down or changed people's names, or just put a Christian name and made them not so identifiable. I also looked at the decision that where there was bad behavior on my part involved, in the sense of some very messy times in my life where I was, involved in drugs and drinking and partying, that I wouldn't put anyone else in those pictures apart from me. So the people that I was with aren't named, aren't identified. The partners aren't included in those scenes. It's just me, because that's my shit, basically. But there are some things you can't avoid, because there are some people that had a huge impact on my life for good or bad. And you just have to sort of bite the bullet and decide, well, I can't write that out because they're too significant, or the events that they represent in my life is too significant to not include it. So it's a tough one, that one. It's that kind of, you know, sliver of ice in the writer's heart, isn't it? It's like you have to be truthful.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I saw a meme the other day from somebody. It was saying, nobody cares if you write today. Nobody cares if you write your memoir. Your family don't want you to write your memoir. I thought, yeah, exactly. Of course they don't. Why would they? But I think if you have to write something, and well, another example is that my most recent novel is based on a real incident that happened with a stalker. And I made a decision very early on that the only way to do that would be to take the bare bones of the case, but to flesh them out with somebody very different to the actual person. Partly because the real living person wasn't that interesting when you actually met them in real life. They were actually really pathetic. And I wanted my antagonist to be much more of a charismatic, rounded character than the real person was, in a way. But also, you know, I didn't want to write a book that was basically about the court case I went through, because, you know, that's not really a novel then. It's just a kind of, that's writing about, it's a piece of journalism, really.
Yeah, I was the book that I've written about a certain period of my life, which is when I flew for an airline, also relates back to when I was very young, and it does include some not nice things, really. Not well, the stories that I had to write about me growing up were necessary to get to the understanding of the stories later on. So I've taken a lot of it out. But the stories that remain in it about my mother and father, my father's no longer with me, so I felt I could, because it was my story as well. I decided that I had to understand elements of my father's behaviour in order for me to write about it. So I came to a kind of peace with myself about, one, knowing it was my story to write. And I also talked to my mum about it and said, when it gets to the point of it being published, I can show you if you want, if you're interested. I also said to my sister, you know, if you want to read it before, because I cut my sister out of the family story and she was a bit gutted. But because there was too many characters, suddenly it wasn't her story as well that I was sort of writing. So there was many choices that I made in order to tell the story as it needed to be told, which is, you know, there's the truth of it. It's my truth of it, of that story. My sister would probably tell it very differently, as would all the other characters. But I decided that it needed to be told, and this is the way that I had to tell it. But no one gets off lightly in the story. I didn't want to make it all about everyone else's kind of bad apart from me. So I felt like I'd made it quite a level story, in the sense that we're all in it, you know, and we're all kind of got our foibles and everything.
There's a bit in mine where there's a bit early on to do with my father, who was very abusive, where I felt that I was proper to say that my sister, the elder of my two sisters, memories of him are very different to mine, and to say how she felt about him, which is very different to how I feel about him, and to acknowledge that there was two different experiences of the same person. But that doesn't make my account any less truthful or valid. But I did feel that was necessary, just because it was such a strong bone of contention within the family dynamic. But at the end of the day, it's my story, not hers. So you have to tell your truth that is your truth, isn't it? You have to.
And you have to decide what stories you hold back, and you can, you can hint at something without really sort of saying the whole thing as well. So there's many different ways of telling it. I also decided that anyone that I sort of, that the people that were now dead, I don't know, I kind of came to terms, and this might sound really awful, but I kind of came to terms that they weren't here to mind anymore. But I had to look after the living. But ultimately, the responsibility comes down to the book, and the book being as good as it can be. So I couldn't, some of the stuff that I wrote, I had to write in third person because I couldn't stomach it, and then I changed it back to first person. But I Alan Davies, for instance, has written a very candid memoir, and he's fallen out with his whole family. So he's basically taken that decision to tackle that awful subject and to go with it and to then to publish it. And I also, any time you can sort of think, well, actually, I'm just not comfortable with publishing this, but sometimes I think stories are necessary to write, but whether they're necessary to publish is another thing. But what were you thinking, Laura? What were you wondering about your own stories?
As I covered a bit last week, I had breast cancer when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I kind of keep coming back to it. I've written about it in different ways, I've blogged about it, and part of me thinks I want to write a book about that time at some point. But my sister had a massive stroke just around the same time, and the two stories are so interwoven that it's kind of impossible to write one without the other, because, for example, we were both pregnant, and the day that I had my first chemotherapy, my sister had her baby the same day, and then the day that my daughter came home from hospital, my sister had her stroke. So I feel like it's impossible to completely separate the stories, but at the same time, it's not the issue of writing negative things about somebody who's still alive. It's just about whether it's ethical to kind of tell her story as well, or my take on our story, when I mean, she's alive, and but she's not really cognitively in a position to say whether or not she would be happy with it. So yeah, it's just the way they're kind of intertwined, and it makes that, I mean, that's what makes it so incredible, the fact that the two things happened at the same time. But I don't know where, and like I remember when Paul was talking about his dad, there's a quote, I think, about where I can't remember the exact words, but it's like, if people wanted you to write nice things about them, they should have behaved better. But yeah, I'm not planning to write anything negative about anybody. It's just like, it's such a personal story. And
is this going to be a non-fiction?
Yeah, I think I'd like to write a memoir about it, but I've always been put off doing it because I don't know whether or not it's ethical.
Well, I think that's for you to decide, but I feel if you aren't, I mean, I would certainly always say write the book that you have to write. And if it keeps coming back to you, it's because, you need to write it in some form. And, you can, as you write it, I would see how it feels writing it, and then perhaps talk to other people in your family, or other people. Who was it? An Irish writer said he wrote about his aunt and his mum. Colm Toyben? He brought out a non-fiction piece about growing up, and he rang his aunt and his mum the night before and said, "Oh, just to tell you that there's a book coming out tomorrow about you, just in case you're interested." And he didn't have any qualms at all. It was like, this is my story, you know. It is, I think it's such a difficult thing to give advice on, because only you will be able to live with what you do. But I think it's like, I just think, as you know, as a storyteller, it's such an interesting story to tell.
Maybe what you said about writing, you don't have to publish something, you can write it and not publish it. I hadn't really considered that. So maybe I just need to write it and then hold on to it until such a time as, well, if there ever is a time when it feels, you know, like it would be the right thing to do.
And I also think sometimes by writing something, it opens up room for another way of writing about it as well, perhaps putting it into an element of it into a, but sometimes I feel like memoir writing that wants to come out of us is a stepping stone that we need to take in order to perhaps get to something else that we can't see yet. So
I think it's just like a more intense version of the kind of writing with the door closed, isn't it? You just have to not think about how other people are going to take it.
Yeah.
The other thing to bear in mind, I know this isn't the same in your case, Laura, but when you're writing about people who've, you know, done you harm, you know, the question there is, well, there are many ways in which those stories can be made public. One is by going to the police and reporting them, and then there's a crime report and that goes public and it's in the newspaper. You know, would you not report something for fear that that person's going to be, you know, written about in the newspaper? Not, of course you wouldn't. You still report the crime. So at the end of the day, the responsibility for that lies with the person who committed the crime, not with the person who reported it.
But I would write it, is my advice, because these things sit in us, these stories sit in us, and I do feel, unless they're expressed somehow, they can create, I mean, this is not scientifically proven, but I feel like they can create barriers to other ways of understanding our work, even if it's just so that you get to a point where you like, oh, you know, I needed to get that down. Because also there's an element of not forgetting that I think is really important with paying sort of service to a time. And even if it's something you hand over to someone else at some point and say, this was this time, you know, and it's a record in a different way, and not everything, because not everything has to be towards publication, I suppose, even though it's nice that, you know, you can have that much of things published. But I just think personally, it could be a really important thing for you to achieve and to get down.
Okay, thank you. That's really helped.
Great. Oh, I'm all fired up. Right. So, okay. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to talk about before we go on to the practical part of today? Ooh, no. Okay. Right. So, as it's strange how sometimes one thing leads on to another in these courses, and I like it because it feels a little bit magic. So I was going to talk about, you know, there's all sorts of reasons for writing, and to become published is just one of them. But I have been recently rereading Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird book, which I think I mentioned earlier on in the course. I'm going to hold it up again. This is the American edition, and it's got birds on it, which is a lot nicer than the UK edition, I must say. So often they are. And it got me thinking about other reasons for pursuing a writing life, which might not be always about sort of going for gold. At the recent Emmy award ceremony, I don't know if any of you watched it, Michaela Cole, if you're all familiar with Michaela Cole, writer of a comedy Chewing Gum initially, and then the phenomenal I May Destroy You. She gave one of the night's shortest speeches, and perhaps its most revealing. In her remarks, Cole did something unusual. She thought about her audience and tried to reach beyond the other entertainers seated in the room with her. And this is what she said in her short speech. She said, write the tale that scares you, that makes you feel uncertain, that isn't comfortable. She said, I dare you. Visibility these days seems to somehow equate to success. Do not be afraid to disappear from it, from us, for a while, and see what comes to you in the silence. Now, I thought I had to include that tonight because she was speaking directly to like the potential storytellers and the potential stories that we all have, which one day might end up on stage or published, or as we were talking about, just being written, those stories that, you know, that scare us and make us feel uncertain and uncomfortable. That's where her art comes from. And she also sort of suggested in this time of where presence and online presence is like really just seems to be very important, to not worry about being quieter and less visible in order to create this work. And I just thought that was a really quite a substantial thing for a young woman to say and to advise, especially on a night of pomp and circumstance. She sort of reminded us of the value of quieter triumphs. So that was just one thought I wanted to present to you tonight, to go into the silences and not worry so much about how things appear. And I've been, on another note, I was sort of thinking lately about sort of experimenting with my writing process and how to sort of speed up my writing process as well. So I thought that it'd be interesting to mention tonight. Last week I hosted a launch of a graphic novel at the bookshop in Crystal Palace, and it's a brilliant graphic novel. I can't remember the title now. I'm not trying to sell the book anyway, but the illustrator came along and she said she sketched her ideas for the storyline before setting them into full artworks. And I thought that this is where perhaps short assignments can be used to play about a bit before committing to like longer pieces of writing, which brought me back to Anne Lamott. Sorry, if you are following my train of thought here tonight. And her passage on short assignments. So I'm just going to read you this before, because if you haven't read any of her chapters, you're going to see how it works, because they're quite, as you can see, my photocopying is really straight as I am. Anyway, so short assignments. The first useful concept is the idea of short assignments. Often when you sit down to write, what you have in mind is an autobiographical novel about your childhood, or a play about the immigrant experience, or a history of, say, women. But this is like trying to scale a glacier. It's hard to get your footing, and your fingertips get all red and frozen and torn up. Then your mental illnesses arrive at the desk like your sickest, most secretive relatives, and they pull up chairs in a semicircle around the computer, and they try to be quiet, but you know they are there with their weird coppery breath leering at you behind your back. What I do at this point, as the panic mounts and the jungle drums begin beating, and I realize that the well has run dry and that my future is behind me and I'm going to have to get a job, only I'm completely unemployable, is to stop. First, I try to breathe, because I'm either sitting there panting like a lapdog, or I'm unintentionally making slow asthmatic death rattles. So I just sit there for a minute, breathing slowly, quietly. I let my mind wander. After a moment, I may notice that I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm too old for orthodontia, and whether right now would be a good time to make a few calls. And then I start to think about learning to use makeup and how maybe I could find some boyfriend who is not a total and complete fixer-upper. And then my life would be totally great and I'll be happy all the time. And then I think about all the people I should have called back before I sat down to work, and how I should probably at least check in with my agent and tell him this great idea I have and see if he thinks it's a good idea, and see if he thinks I need orthodontia, if that is what he is actually thinking whenever we have lunch together. Then I think about someone I'm really annoyed with, or some financial problem that is driving me crazy, and decide that I must resolve this before I get down to today's work. So I become a dog with a chew toy, worrying it for a while, wrestling it to the ground, flinging it over my shoulder, chasing it, licking it, chewing it, flinging it back over my shoulder. I just stop short of actually barking. But all of this only takes somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes, so I haven't actually wasted that much time. Still, it leaves me winded. I go back to trying to breathe slowly and calmly, and I finally notice the 1-inch picture frame that I put on my desk to remind me of short assignments. It reminds me that all I have to do is write down as much as I can see through a 1-inch picture frame. This is all I have to bite off for the time being. All I am going to do right now, for example, is write that one paragraph that sets the story in my hometown in the late 50s when the trains were still running. I'm going to paint a picture of it in words on my word processor. Or all I'm going to do is to describe the main character the very first time we meet her, when she walks out the front door and onto the porch. I'm not even going to describe the expression on her face when she first notices the blind dog sitting behind the wheel of her car. Just what I can see through the 1-inch picture frame, just one paragraph describing this woman in the town where I grew up the first time we encounter her. E.L. Doctorow once said that writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. You don't have to see where you're going. You don't have to see your destination or everything you will pass along the way. You just have to see 2 or 3 feet ahead of you. This is right up there, the best advice about writing or life I have ever heard. So I've completely exhausted myself thinking about the people I most resent in the world and my more arresting financial problems, and of course the orthodontia. I remember to pick up the 1-inch picture frame and to figure out a 1-inch piece of my story to tell. One small scene, one memory, one exchange. I also remember a story that I know I've told elsewhere, but that over and over helps me to get a grip. 30 years ago, my older brother, who was 10 years old at the time, was trying to get a report on birds written that he'd had 3 months to write, which was due the next day. We were out at our family cabin in Bolinas, and he was at the kitchen table, close to tears, surrounded by binder paper and pencils and unopened books on birds, immobilized by the hugeness of the task ahead. Then my father sat down beside him, put his arm around my brother's shoulder and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird." There we go, bird by bird. That's all we have to do. So I hope you found that is as inspiring as myself. I always remember that. I always remember whenever starting something, it is literally bird by bird. You know, I remember being in that car in the E.L. Doctorow of just seeing the ground straight in front. And then, you know, I mean, it's just the best piece of, right? It takes all the stress away sometimes just to remember that. So this week, I thought with all the sort of strange news that continually keeps going on, I don't know if it'll ever end, but I thought, let's try to write about something else which will always keep coming at us. hopefully in life, and that's love and passion. Now, I know it's quite a broad subject, but I thought we could do with a bit of love in the room tonight, because it's quite stressful living in this country at the moment, and I think it's not going to change much. But anyway, love is an eternal subject, right? So it has endless possibilities and creates hope in the bleakest of moments. So when it breaks down, it can also create the opposite of hope. But tonight I'm going to sort of think about the many different forms of love, and not necessarily just between lovers. There's love we can explore for children and parents and animals, and also acts of kindness and generosity, which can leave you stunned when everything around you seems bleak. Recently, when my mum was in hospital, I've been spending a lot of time in hospital with her or standing outside. Someone bought me a banana at a moment when I had no money on me. I don't know how I'd done it, but I come out with my purse, and it was someone, just a woman. She just said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I'm just really hungry." And she just said, I've got a banana. And so she just and I nearly cried, because I just thought, this is it. And I said, "Oh no, actually I did have 50p," and she wouldn't take any money. But this was just a moment anyway that felt like love from somewhere anyway. So tonight, what we're going to look at doing, putting all that aside, is that we're going to try and write a short story. Now, I thought this would be good since we've got a bit of time. And also, we're going to look at writing perhaps a piece of flash fiction. Now, is anyone sort of familiar with what flash fiction is? Well, I'll tell you anyway. It's just to recap. It's a term to describe stories which act and go by in a sort of flash, and they can make the reader blink. And they are usually between 200 and 500 words. I would say what Paul had written would probably count as a flash story. I don't know how many words it was in total, Paul, your postcard pieces, but I reckon it would stand 500 words. Yeah. So yes, you'd be at the upper limits of the flash story, but something like that is quite sort of quick and is normally readable in one sitting. And also, I was thinking about writing short pieces, these one picture frames. And if you imagine an A4 sheet of paper, something that would perhaps fit on just one side, a story that starts at the top of the paper and ends by the end of the paper. That's just to give you a sort of spatial idea of length. I don't even know if that makes sense, but it's a piece of paper. So it's something that's manageable. It's something that Anne Lamott is talking about, which is perhaps a frame, a short, all you can see through a 1-inch frame. So with the flash fiction and with other sort of story writing, a lot of people say there's this expression, I don't know if you use it ever, Paul, but it's like you arrive late and you leave early. Someone always said it's like how you should at a party. You should arrive.
That's the advice they give thriller writers.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Start a scene late and arrive early start it late and leave it early.
Yeah. It's also what people recommend to short story writers. And I think what it is like urgency. Urgency, that's right. But not spending too much time, perhaps setting it up. So anyway, it's just interesting to think about. So I thought, when thinking about love, of course, it's a big subject. So I thought we could try and write a story of this length tonight. And you can start it in a startling way. So I've got a few suggestions of things you might like to think about when writing about love. You could introduce a character falling in love in an original way, or you could think about when you fell in love. I was trying to think of the kind of upbeat aspects of love rather than all the divorces and the rotten apples of love. So because I just thought, oh, we need some good energy going on at the moment. Or think of a bizarre recent event, like someone giving you a banana when you most need it, or when you felt intense love from a stranger, or perhaps a dog. This for you, Khan, a dog doing a strange dance to your lover in the morning. Or think about a first kiss, the best kiss you've ever had, the day someone walked into a room and changed your life, or odd chance meetings which perhaps stretch the notion of what love means or love is. So it is quite broad, but I suppose with a short story, and this is my point, with something as short as an A4 side, you can afford to play around a bit. And if you don't like what you've written, you haven't spent 3 years on a novel. You've literally spent half an hour, and you'll find something in there that is something perhaps you can take out and use again and rewrite. Or you might write a bloody brilliant story off the top of your head. We don't know, but we're going to experiment now. Anne Lamott also says, perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor, the enemy of the people. It will keep you cramped and insane your whole life. So this doesn't have to be perfect. The beauty of writing something short and sketchy is that it doesn't really matter if it works or not, but something will come from it. So does anyone else, Paul, have you got any things about love that you might like to share that could be, I know it's a bit broad. Anything comes to mind?
It's one of the hardest things to write about, isn't it? Because it's been written about so much, and because it's so easy to fall into sort of hallmark cliches. I think best advice is to think about, if you're going to draw on your own experience, to think about the quirky surprising stories or the unexpected elements. And I think if you're going to write about something that hasn't happened to you, then maybe think about love other than romantic love. I think romantic love is the one that is much easier to slip into cliche around, isn't it? Because it's been so. And unless, of course, that the aim is to actually send that up. You can do a great comic piece about a character with all the. I wrote a short story once called "Enjoy Karaoke" about a gay couple on honeymoon, and the whole honeymoon is basically about trying to pick up other men on their honeymoon. So I just you can kind of subvert the expectation of the romantic cliche as well. That's another thing you can do. Take the cliche and then subvert it.
We've got quite a broad thing, but it could also be, yes, I mean, if you are stuck, to have a look around your space of where you are, and even if you've got an object that you covet, you could write about an object in a very interesting way as well. And even if you pick it up and hold it in your hand and perhaps describe it in that way, that's love for objects is also quite an interesting thing to write about.
Friends, I think one of the great things that, especially with men, is very rarely talked about or written about is, there's a really good book by Andrew Hagen called Mayflies that I read recently, which is about two men and their friendship, and it's a really heartbreaking book. It's a novel, but it's clearly elements of memoir in it when you read it. It rings true. And it's about this platonic love between these two male friends and their diverging lifestyles and how they grow up. They're really close as boys and they grow apart, and then they come back together again because of a dramatic event. And it's actually been one of the most beautiful books I've read in a long time, because it's so unexpected to read about the tender feelings they have for each other, despite being very, very straight and very quite macho in the case of one of them. And there's something very tender about that because it's so unexpected.
Excellent. So yes, you've got quite a broad brief, but anyway, we're going to go for it. So I'm going to give you, you can write automatically, you know, I mean, you can always condense this later on. So going to give you 15 minutes to fill up a page. And then I'm going to give you another 15 minutes after that for something else. So, or it might be slightly longer. But okay, so maybe I'll give you 20 minutes for the first, 20 minutes, okay, to fill up a page with a story about love, whichever way you want to take it. So are we ready? Pens at the ready? Go. Fantastic. Well done, Jan. Did you write more then?
I did. I do tend to write a bit fast once I get cracking.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Did you go? You went over, did you?
Well, I did 2.
Wow. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay.
Well, they're not brilliant, but I did 2.
Well, that's fine. You've got a lot of material. That's all I can say, because there are going to be other ways that you can use that later on. So now I've got you in the mood. Clearly, I can see Carol has reached the bottom, the end, her story. Now you're flowing. I'm going to suggest a second a second exercise, and this is in relation loosely to love, let's just say. Again, this is in an aim to think about flash fiction, short fiction, telling a story that isn't necessarily of a novel length or even a short story length. It's a small moment, perhaps a flash, something that will startle. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Here we are. Yeah, it does. So this is also flash fiction, and I'm going to leave this up here because you've got to have a look at these. I'm going to go through them. So this is all based around the idea of comfort, desire, rest, or action, and it's a bed exercise. I'm not suggesting you go to bed yet, but rather interestingly, a writer once said to me that when they are tackling difficult subjects, they go and they write in bed. Or so that's always an option, but I don't know if it's a good idea, because it's distracting, isn't it? And then you can just slowly go lower and lower. Anyway, so I want you to choose to write from one or more of the following prompts. Whichever sort of appeals to you, take it, and you'll know, because you'll get a little flutter. Hopefully you're like, oh yes, when I mention this. So so the first one is write about memories of waking up in other beds, people you've woken up alongside. Second option, write about being tucked into bed too tightly or not tight enough. Third one, write about hotel beds, caravans, sleeping bags, chairs, benches, floors, any other places you've woken up. You could also create a list. If you create a sort of strange list on your paper, this allows the reader to work out what the narrator is like without you having to give too many clues. So you can play with that, of just a list of places that you've woken up. Or you could use your postcard, Paul, again, if you wanted to expand on that. Write the story of your mattress from the mattress's point of view. If mattresses could talk, what would they say? Write a story of hiding under a bed and what you saw when you were under there. So these can be, again, you could be using your I remember recollections of real things that have happened, if you're really into writing autobiography and you like that. Or you could start to make something up using this exercise, or you could take a little bit of your autobiography and expand it into fiction if you want to play with it. So this is about generating material as well, but not huge swathes. With an idea to just to try and create a short, sort of lively piece. Okay, so I'm going to give you another 20 odd minutes to write. Obviously, the fast writers can carry on, but there will be an element of using what you've written to compact it as for the assignment. So, but for this moment in time, just try and write a whole sheet and get to like a beginning, start at the beginning and get to an end if you can in this sort of short story. Okay, I'm going to leave these up here for a while so that you can have a look and decide which one excites you the most imaginatively. So, ready, steady, go. Would be good. So now we've got a few minutes before the end. I want you to look through what you've written and mark with a star any particular sentences that you think are good, or that you need to perhaps expand upon, or that you would like to pull out of perhaps a particular section that you think, oh no, that's a standout idea or image, and just go through. You might not have time to do both. If you do, then this is great. So this is about looking for your kind of hot spots or your ideas that really leap out at you, that just so that you can go over and then have a look. So this is a brief run through, comb through of what you've written. It might take. Thank you. I got to the end. Now, are there any crossovers between the two pieces that you've written? Are there sort of any constellation of ideas that you could put perhaps from one into the other? Is there something, because the next thing I'm going to ask you to do for this week's assignment is not to come up with anything new, but to work on what you've already written today, because I'm sure you've heard this before, but most of writing is rewriting. And I think you could perhaps work with this material that you've got in the view to creating a very short story. So somewhere, again, between the word count of 200 or 500 words. So either it's up to you. If you've got things going on in both stories, then you think, oh, I'm going to pull that out and put that together, or layer it on top of each other. And that's up to you. If you want to rewrite elements of those stories that you've pulled out and that you've already marked and thought, that's a really interesting, that really interests me, or I've written that particularly well, then that's also something you can pull out. I mean, also, if you just want to bring next week a small picture frame of something that you've written, like just a scene, and that's fine. Not everyone has to read out next week, but I thought it would be a really interesting thing for you to just work with the material you have this week and try and refine it or condense it, cut it by half, or it's, you know, I mean, some of you might have written only a few words, I don't know. But it's up to you. But the essence of a flash fiction story is that it's quite dynamic. It doesn't need to over explain anything. Us readers can work it out. You could just concentrate on a very small frame of it if that's all you get round to doing. But I want you to kind of rework what you've done and rewrite it a little bit. And then it's just about polishing sometimes if you think it's nearly there as well. I mean, if you're lucky enough to ever write something and it come out wonderful the first time, you could just tweak it a little bit. But so we're going for a really short story. And if any of you feel like bold enough to read it out next week, then that's keep that in mind. But if not, really work on what you've come up with, because love and beds, you know, in a way, I mean, there could be a funny thing going on there anyway between the two subjects, or it could be like really strange. You could just take your first idea and sort of put it alongside the second idea, you know. Give yourself a bit of time as well to perhaps play around. So that's the idea, really, is to see what you can create from your material that you have already written. So how does that sound? Is anyone inspired by that? I think they can carry forth into this rainy night. Yeah, great. Would anyone like to just say a couple of words of anything they particularly enjoyed tonight with the writing? Did anyone write from the viewpoint of a mattress? Rachel, you you dived in, did you?
I did. I started a really sweet story about the mattress that I didn't, it was embellished. Like, I didn't have the same mattress for all this time, but I've pretended that I had it for like 25 years, and how it's seen me grow and things change over that time, and a very sort of parental viewpoint, but also, yeah, quite codependent and, you know, enmeshed.
Yes. Well, also, yes. I wonder if, you know, if you are writing from a mattress's point of view and it gets really old, whether it does start to feel the age of the, you know, the springs coming through, and yeah. And a parental mattress. I really like the sound of that. Can I have one of those, please? Brilliant. It's really raining. Okay, so, well, we've got to 9 o'clock. Can you believe it? There's thunder and lightning here in Penge. Don't know if anyone else has experienced the wild weather. But thank you very much for participating, and please do bring your stories next week. Give yourself enough time to play and to polish and to rewrite. And I look forward to seeing you next week with your wonderful flash stories.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
I'll